เมื่อปีที่แล้วศาสตราจารย์คิชอร์ได้ออกหนังสือชื่อ The Great Convergence Asia, the West and the Logic of One World ซึ่งนำเสนอแนวความคิดที่ว่าเราทุกคนอยู่บนโลกใบเดียวกันปัจจุบันแต่ละประเทศไม่สามารถมองแค่ประโยชน์ของประเทศตัวเองได้แล้วแต่ต้องมองถึงผลประโยชน์ของโลกด้วย
So despite today's convergence of interests and values, as you argued in the Great Convergence, we still see conflicts like the one in South China Sea, we still see conflict in eastern Ukraine, or the conflict between Israel and Hamas going on right now. So we're not actually living in this one world yet, right?
Well, actually, the good news that the Great Convergence puts across is that even if you add up the people dying in the Ukraine conflict, in the Syrian conflict, in the Palestine-Gaza conflict, the number of people dying in interstate wars is going down and down and down. And indeed, even Ukraine shows us if a crisis like Ukraine had happened in the 19th century or even the first half of the 20th century, there would have been a war between the great powers, between Russia and France, UK, America. But the fact that you had a major crisis in Ukraine and no danger of war.
Maybe we're on the brink of it.
I can guarantee you, I'll take a bet with you that there will be no war between any two major powers. I can say this with great confidence because the thesis of my book, The Great Convergence, is that the world has changed fundamentally. Now, there will be geopolitical rivalry between Russia and the United States, rivalry between China and the United States, rivalry between Russia and European Union will continue. But there will be no war.
Why are you so confident?
Because it's, this is where it's shocking that people don't realize that world history has turned a corner now. Because number one, the costs of war are too high. In today's weaponry, with today's nuclear weapons, a direct confrontation between any two major powers is unthinkable, number one. Number two, this is very surprising to many people, humanity and countries have become more sensible. In fact, there's a Harvard professor called Steven Pinker who came out with a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he said that humanity is climbing the escalator of reason. And as we become more and more reasonable and rational, we kill each other less. And that's why I am so confident, and I can take a bet with you, there will be no war between any two major powers. Now, small states may have skirmishes, there may be civil war in Ukraine, that may happen, but these are small, localized conflicts that will not explode into a major war. That's how the world has changed.
You say we will still have regional conflicts.
Yes.
Do these conflicts reflect the failure of the United Nations?
Certainly, the United Nations should be made more effective. United Nations could do more to prevent conflicts. But the reason why the United Nations is failing, and this is the dirty little secret that I give away in my book, The Great Convergence, the reason why the United Nations is failing is because the great powers, especially the United States of America, has a policy of keeping the United Nations weak. So when it comes to selecting the Secretary General of the United Nations, instead of picking the strongest possible candidate, they pick somebody who's not so strong. This is an American policy. And John Bolton, the former American ambassador to the UN, revealed this in his memoirs. And I think it's a mistake on the part of the West to keep the United Nations weak. And it is now should be European policy or American policy to strengthen the United Nations. And as you know, the next Secretary General for the UN is going to come from Europe, and they should pick somebody as strong as and dynamic as Dag Hammarskjöld. And if they do that, the United Nations will become much, much stronger.
Are you still critical of Western human rights campaigns?
Well, I think that the tragedy about Western human rights campaigns is that the West has got double standards. So the classic example I give is that when you had two countries, both of which had elections, and both of it had their elections overturned, the West imposed sanctions on Myanmar, but didn't impose sanctions on Algeria because they were happy that an Islamist government had been removed in Algeria. That's double standards. And today, the West preaches the concept of R2P, responsibility to protect. So they say we must protect the innocent citizens of Darfur, we must protect the innocent citizens of Kosovo. I agree. So why is the West totally silent on Gaza? Today, as you and I speak, civilians are dying in Gaza. Now give me the name of one major Western leader that has the courage to say, let us stop seeing the death of innocent civilians in Gaza. And that's the failure to do so shows that they have double standards.
What should governments of the future be like?
In the past, at the end of the Cold War, when Francis Fukuyama wrote his essay, The End of History, he said there's only one road, one destination for everybody. We all have to become liberal democracies. But since he wrote that essay, 25 years have passed, and many of the liberal democracies, including the United States, including Western Europe, are struggling, and a non-democracy like China has ended up producing some of the best governance in the world in the last 25 years in terms of improving the living standards of its people. So according to the theory of the West, if you don't have democracy, you cannot succeed. And now you have a strange world where countries without democracy are succeeding and countries with democracy are also failing. So democracy is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for good governance. Now that doesn't mean that we can do without democracy, because in the long run all states have to become democratic. But you must do it carefully, you must make sure your society is ready for it, and you must try to develop a responsible democracy, where at the end of the day, you end up improving the lives of the people. I quoted from a paper written by two Princeton University researchers, Gylens and Page, where they said that even though in theory America has a government of the people, by the people, for the people, the statistical evidence shows that the government doesn't make decisions that benefit the people as a whole, it makes decisions that benefit special interest lobbies. Now that too is not a responsible democracy.
ศาสตราจารย์คิชอร์เป็นคนที่ให้สัมภาษณ์ได้อย่างตรงไปตรงมานะคะแล้วก็มีแนวคิดที่น่าสนใจที่สำคัญค่ะเขาเป็นคนที่เชื่อมั่นในศักยภาพของคนเอเชียและภูมิภาคเอเชียของเราอย่างมากค่ะพบกันใหม่วันเสาร์หน้านะคะวันนี้สวัสดีค่ะ